Two true scary stories from Reddit that will chill you to the bone. Voices in the snowstorm. There's something haunting about snowstorms. They bury the world in a quiet that feels both comforting and oppressive, muffling everything except the relentless howl of the wind. For some, snowstorms are a blanket of tranquility, a chance to sit by the fire with a warm drink and let the world fade away. For others, myself included, they're a gateway to the unexplainable. My name is Alex, and I've spent countless nights scrolling through Reddit threads dedicated to the paranormal, piecing together fragments of other people's chilling encounters. Over the years, I've become a collector of sorts, a curator of the unexplained. It started as a casual interest, a way to distract myself from the monotony of everyday life. But the deeper I delved into these stories, the more I realized how many share an unnerving similarity. Snowstorms. Time and again, I've come across accounts where people describe voices in the wind, figures in the frost, or fleeting glimpses of something not quite human just beyond the veil of snow. I used to dismiss such stories as embellishments or overactive imaginations. But after hearing so many, I've started to wonder if there's something about the storm itself, its isolating nature, its harsh beauty, that opens a door to another world. The stories I'm about to share with you have stuck with me like no others. They were posted by ordinary people, drivers, campers, friends, each recounting a night that changed their lives forever. Of all the threads I've read, these two are the most harrowing, the ones that still make me hesitate to step outside when the snow begins to fall. The first story is titled The Driver's Nightmare. It's the most upvoted, spine-chilling account I've ever come across. And after hearing it, I'm sure you'll never look at a snowstorm the same way again. Story 1. The Driver's Nightmare. The snow was relentless, falling in thick sheets that blurred the road ahead into an endless sea of white. My wipers thrashed back and forth, but they were losing the battle, and I could barely make out the faint glow of my headlights. The weather app had warned of a severe snowstorm, but I'd thought, how bad could it really be? After all, I'd driven through snow before. This was different. This was suffocating. I was a delivery driver, and my last order of the day was supposed to be a simple drop-off to a remote cabin deep in the woods. The directions were clear enough when I'd set off. Take Route 27 to the turnoff marked by an old wooden sign that read Pine Hollow. The GPS, unreliable in this rural area, had already failed me twice, and I was relying on memory and instinct. The snowstorm had other plans. The further I drove, the harder it became to tell where the road ended and the wilderness began. The tires skidded on patches of ice, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter with every lurch and slide. My phone buzzed in its holder, a text notification. I glanced down quickly, hoping it was the customer checking in. "Just leave it by the door," the text read. Relieved, I replied with a quick, "Will do," and turned my focus back to the road. That's when I first heard it. "Alex." It was faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but clear enough to send a chill that wasn't from the cold racing down my spine. I froze for a moment, staring at the swirling snow outside my windshield. It must have been the radio, I thought. A late-night host or a song lyric garbled by static. Except my radio was off. I shook it off, convincing myself I was just overtired. Hours of driving in this blizzard were bound to mess with my head. "Alex," the voice came again. This time it was more distinct, closer, as if someone was standing just outside the car. My heart raced as I glanced at the mirrors, but all I could see was snow. Panic whispered in the back of my mind, but I refused to give in. I turned up the heater, trying to shake the growing unease. The storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling louder as if it were alive, as if it were trying to drown out my thoughts. My headlights caught fleeting shapes in the snow, branches probably, or maybe just tricks of light. I told myself I was imagining things. I had to keep driving. The G's chimed faintly, announcing that I was approaching my destination. I squinted at the screen. According to the map, the cabin should have been just a few hundred feet ahead, but all I saw was a wall of white. Then I spotted it, a dim light flickering in the distance, barely visible through the storm. It had to be the cabin. As I inched closer, the light seemed to shift, almost like it was moving further away. My tires crunched over snow-covered gravel as I turned onto a narrow path lined with skeletal trees. The light danced just ahead, a pale yellow glow that refused to stay still. "Alex," the voice called again, louder this time, cutting through the wind like a knife. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I scanned the darkness outside. I couldn't see anything. No footprints, no movement, just endless snow falling like ash from a burning sky. The light flickered once more before vanishing entirely. The road was narrowing, the walls of trees on either side closing in as if the forest itself were trying to swallow me. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My headlights barely cut through the storm, their glow fading into the white void ahead. That's when I saw it, a dark shape in the middle of the road, like a shadow waiting to pounce. I slowed down, my heart hammering in my chest. As I inched closer, the shape materialized into a car, a sedan, half buried in snow, its headlights dark and its driver nowhere to be seen. Pulling up beside it, I rolled down my window. The cold bit into my face, but I ignored it, craning my neck to see inside. No movement, no sound, just an eerie silence broken only by the distant wail of the wind. I debated driving on, but curiosity got the better of me. Leaving the engine running, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The snow crunched under my boots as I approached the car. It looked old, the paint chipped, and the windows fogged. I tried the driver's door. It creaked open with a sound that set my teeth on edge. Inside, the air was stale, laced with the faint metallic tang of something I couldn't quite place. My flashlight beam swept across the interior, landing on the driver's seat. My stomach churned. Bloody handprints smeared the wheel and door handle, stark and accusing against the gray fabric. "What the hell?" I whispered, my breath fogging in the frigid air. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled map, its edges yellowed and brittle. I hesitated, then picked it up, careful not to disturb the stains that dotted its surface. The map wasn't an ordinary one. It was hand-drawn, marked with cryptic symbols and arrows leading to an X deep in the forest. The voice came again, clearer now. "Alex, you're almost there." I spun around, my flashlight darting through the trees, illuminating nothing but snow and shadows. My pulse thundered in my ears. The voice, it wasn't just in my head. It was real, close, and far too familiar. I glanced back at the car, half expecting someone, or something, to be standing behind me. But the road was empty. Still clutching the map, I climbed back into my truck, locking the doors and trying to catch my breath. The map seemed to burn in my hands, demanding my attention. The markings were crude, but clear enough to follow. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I found myself turning onto a side path barely wide enough for my truck. Tires slipped and skidded as I navigated the uneven terrain, branches clawing at the windows like skeletal hands. The voice grew louder with each passing minute, almost guiding me now. It wasn't just calling my name. It was speaking to me, fragments of sentences buried under the howl of the storm. "You know this place? You have to remember." The trees parted abruptly, revealing a small clearing. At its center stood a cabin, its dark silhouette outlined by the faint glow of light seeping from the windows. The sight was both a relief and a fresh source of dread. I parked a few yards away and killed the engine, letting the silence settle over me. The cabin looked abandoned, its wooden planks weathered and warped, but the light suggested otherwise. Someone or something was inside. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out into the cold once more. The snow seemed to deaden every sound except the crunch of my boots. As I approached the cabin, the voice became almost deafening. "Come, Alex. It's been so long." My legs felt like lead, but something compelled me forward. The cabin door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind nudged it. I hesitated at the threshold, peering into the dimly lit interior. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single table, a chair, and a fireplace that crackled weakly. Shadows danced on the walls, their movements unsettlingly human. And then I saw it. On the table, next to a half-melted candle, lay a photo frame. I stepped closer, my breath hitching as I picked it up. The photo inside was old, faded, but unmistakable. It was me, standing in the snow, smiling, with someone I couldn't quite place. The voice spoke again, this time from within the cabin itself. "You're finally home, Alex." The cabin door creaked as I pushed it open fully, revealing a space that seemed frozen in time. The faint smell of mildew mingled with the wood smoke curling lazily from the fireplace. The flickering flames cast long, distorted shadows on the walls, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But my feet didn't move. The table in the center of the room caught my attention again. Beside the photo frame lay a battered journal, its leather cover cracked and faded. Drawn by an inexplicable compulsion, I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was erratic, scrawled in uneven lines, as though the writer had been trembling. Words like voices, trapped, and don't listen jumped out at me. One passage, written in bold letters and underlined multiple times, sent a chill down my spine. The voices are not what they seem. They know your name. They know your past. Do not follow them. Once you leave this cabin, you may never return. My breath quickened as I read further. The entries detailed the writer's descent into paranoia. Hearing the same voice I had, a voice that claimed to know them, that begged and demanded in equal measure. "I can't trust it," the final entry read, "but I can't escape it either." The air inside the cabin seemed heavier now, pressing against my chest. The voice called again, louder, clearer, as if it were right behind me. "Alex, please! I need your help." I froze, gripping the journal so tightly my fingers ached. This time, the voice sounded different. Not menacing, but desperate. "Human, I'm out here. You have to hurry." Against every warning, the journal screamed at me. I stepped back outside. The snowstorm had lessened, but the night was still deathly cold. The light from the cabin windows faded quickly as I moved farther into the clearing. "Where are you?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice trembling. "Just ahead," it replied, the sound tugging me toward the tree line. "I'm trapped. Please." The forest loomed, its shadows writhing with each gust of wind. I hesitated at the edge, but the voice came again, weaker this time, as if fading. "Please don't leave me." I pushed forward, flashlight sweeping through the dense undergrowth. The snow seemed to muffle every sound except the crunch of my boots and the voice pulling me deeper into the trees. But then something changed. The tone of the voice shifted, becoming darker, colder. "You're so close, Alex. Just a little farther." A shiver ran down my spine. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie, fragmented light across the forest. That's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the snow, pale and translucent, their faces hollow and gaunt. They moved slowly, deliberately, their eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me as I realized the voice had gone silent. These figures, they were the voice. They had been calling me all along. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale visible in the freezing air. The figures didn't move faster, but they didn't stop either. Their presence was suffocating, their eyes unblinking. I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the icy ground. The forest seemed endless, the trees pressing closer with each step. The cabin, it had to be close. The voice returned, but now it was mocking, laughing, echoing through the trees. "You can't escape, Alex. You belong here." I burst into the clearing, my legs burning with exhaustion. The cabin stood dark and silent, its light extinguished. I didn't care. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut, locking it and collapsing against it. The laughter outside grew louder, then stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a single whisper, right by my ear, "You'll never leave." The night passed in a blur of terror and exhaustion. I stayed in the corner of the cabin, gripping the journal like a talisman, too afraid to move. When morning finally came, sunlight pierced through the cracks in the walls. The storm had passed. I stumbled outside, blinking against the brightness. A search party of local authorities found me not long after. their faces etched with worry. "You're lucky to be alive," one of them said as they helped me into their vehicle. I glanced back toward the clearing as we drove away. The cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. The road where I had found the abandoned car was empty, pristine snow covering any trace of the vehicle. As the warmth of the heater seeped into my frozen limbs, I clutched the journal tighter. It was the only proof I had of the nightmare I'd survived. But even now, as I sit here recounting this story, I can still hear it. That voice, faint and distant, carried on the wind. Story 2. The Camper's Dread. The snow crunched beneath their boots as the group of friends made their way deeper into the forest. 4 of them in total: Ryan, the seasoned camper; Emily, his girlfriend; Claire, the adventurous spirit; and Max, the skeptic who was more interested in his phone than the outdoors. The forest was a wonderland, blanketed in white. Trees stood tall and still, their branches weighed down by snow, creating a serene silence that was both beautiful and unnerving. "This is perfect," Ryan said, dropping his pack at the clearing he had scouted on a map weeks earlier. "No cell service, no crowds, just us and nature. Sounds more like no heat and no Wi-Fi," Max muttered, earning a laugh from Claire. They set up camp quickly, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The tents went up, a fire crackled to life, and soon the smell of roasting marshmallows filled the clearing. "This is exactly what I needed," Emily said, holding her hands out to the fire. "Just peace and quiet." As the sky darkened, the group huddled closer to the fire, trading stories and laughing until their voices echoed through the woods. Eventually, the cold drove them to their tents. The fire burned low, casting faint embers into the sky. The first sound came just as Claire was zipping her tent shut. A faint whisper carried on the wind. She froze, turning her head toward the trees. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Max asked from his tent, already tucked into his sleeping bag. "I thought I heard." Claire trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind. Probably the wind." But as the night wore on, the whispers returned. They were faint at first, blending with the rustling of the trees. By midnight, they grew louder, distinct, and strangely human. Emily stirred, poking her head out of the tent. "Ryan, do you hear that?" Ryan sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight. He shone it around the clearing, but the light revealed only snow and shadows. "Probably the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The whispers circled the campsite now, moving from one side to the other, as if searching. Claire emerged from her tent, her eyes wide. "This isn't normal," she said, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Wind doesn't sound like this." Ryan nodded. Everyone stay together. "Let's check it out." Reluctantly, Max joined them, grumbling as he wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "This better not be some prank," he said, glaring at Claire, who shot him an incredulous look. Armed with flashlights, the group ventured a few feet beyond the campsite, the snow crunching loudly underfoot. The whispers seemed to retreat as they moved, always just out of reach. "Hello," Ryan called, his voice echoing. "Is someone out there?" No response. Only the eerie, rhythmic murmurs, growing softer, then louder, like an indecipherable chant. "I don't like this," Emily whispered, clutching Ryan's arm. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence was deafening, heavy, and oppressive. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Let's go back," Claire said, her voice trembling. As they turned, their flashlights flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move independently of their own. The air grew colder, biting against their exposed skin. Back at the campsite, they huddled close to the fire, stoking it higher in a desperate attempt to dispel the chill. The whispers didn't return, but none of them could sleep. Morning arrived sluggishly, the pale sunlight filtering through a gray sky. The group packed up their belongings quickly, eager to leave. "This place is cursed," Claire muttered under her breath as they trudged back toward the trailhead. Ryan glanced over his shoulder one last time. The clearing where they had camped looked pristine, untouched, as if they had never been there. But in the distance, barely visible against the snow, was a figure. Tall, unmoving, and watching. He didn't tell the others. Not then. The morning light cast a cold, gray pall over the campsite. The fire had long since died, leaving only a circle of ash and charred wood. The group was subdued as they packed their belongings, the events of the previous night hanging heavily over them. As Claire rolled up her sleeping bag, her gaze drifted to the snow just beyond the tents. She froze. "Guys, come look at this." The others gathered around her, their breath visible in the frigid air. In the snow were footprints, large, deliberate, and unmistakably human. They circled the tents, meandering as if someone had been watching them in the dead of night. "Did one of you get up?" Ryan asked, his voice tight. Everyone shook their heads. "Maybe it was a ranger," Max offered weakly. Ryan knelt, examining the prints. "No way. These lead into the woods, but they don't come back." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "What if someone's out there messing with us?" Emily whispered. Claire tightened her jacket around herself. "We need to figure out what's going on. If someone's out there, they could be dangerous." Despite their apprehension, curiosity and a sense of unease drove them to follow the tracks. They moved as a group, their boots crunching over the frozen ground. The footprints wove through the trees, deeper into the woods where the snow seemed untouched by sunlight. The forest grew darker and more oppressive with each step. The trees were gnarled and ancient, their branches interlocking to form a canopy that blocked the sky. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the occasional snap of a twig. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a snowman, not the cheerful kind made by children, but a crude, almost grotesque figure. It was tall, its body misshapen, with jagged branches for arms and a face made of rocks and twigs that formed a twisted, mocking grin. Surrounding the snowman were symbols etched into the snow. They were intricate and unfamiliar, looping and intersecting in ways that made them almost hypnotic. "What the hell is this?" Max muttered, stepping closer. Ryan grabbed his arm. "Don't touch anything." Claire crouched near one of the symbols, careful not to disturb it. "These look ancient, like runes or something." Emily shivered, pulling her scarf tighter. "This doesn't feel right. We should go." Before anyone could respond, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't faint or elusive. They were loud, insistent, and close. The voices overlapped, a cacophony of unintelligible words that seemed to come from every direction. "Back to the campsite," Ryan shouted, pulling Emily to her feet. As they turned to leave, the whispers morphed into screams, high-pitched, blood-curdling, and inhuman. The sound was unbearable, piercing their ears and driving them into a blind panic. They ran, their flashlights bouncing wildly in the dim light. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting and shifting as if alive. When they finally burst into the clearing where their campsite had been, they skidded to a halt. The tents were shredded, their contents scattered across the snow. The fire pit was destroyed, the ashes smeared in cold. The area looked like it had been ransacked by a wild animal, or something worse. No, Emily whispered, clutching her head. "Everything's gone," Max said, his voice shaking. "What the hell did this?" Ryan scanned the perimeter, his flashlight revealing nothing but shadows. "We can't stay here. We need to leave now." Claire pointed toward the edge of the clearing. "Look!" In the snow, leading away from the wreckage, were more footprints. But these were different. They were larger, impossibly so, and the toes ended in claw-like impressions. "Those aren't human," Claire said, her voice barely audible. For a moment, no one spoke. The forest around them was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Then, from the direction of the new tracks, came a low, guttural growl. "Run," Ryan whispered, and they obeyed without hesitation. The growl chased them into the forest, echoing through the icy stillness. The storm, which had been a distant threat earlier, now roared to life, flinging snow in their faces and obscuring their vision. The wind howled like a living thing, carrying with it the faint, taunting whispers. Ryan led the way, his flashlight flickering as the batteries struggled against the cold. "Stick together," he shouted over the storm. But the forest seemed determined to split them apart. The trees closed in, their twisted branches clawing at the group like skeletal hands. Snow fell in blinding sheets, erasing the trail behind them. "I can't see anything," Emily cried, her voice trembling with panic. "Just keep moving," Ryan urged, though even he sounded unsure. As they stumbled forward, Claire suddenly stopped. "Wait, do you hear that?" The others paused, their breath coming in ragged gasps. At first, it was just the wind, but then came the unmistakable sound of a voice, soft, familiar, and achingly close. "Claire!" Her eyes widened. "That's my mom." "Claire?" Ryan grabbed her arm, but she wrenched free. "I have to, she's calling for me." Claire disappeared into the trees before anyone could stop her. "Claire!" Ryan shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The remaining three huddled together, fear and desperation mounting. "What's happening?" Emily whimpered. "This isn't real, right? It's just the storm messing with us." "It's more than that," Max muttered, his face pale. "Something's out here. It's trying to separate us." Ryan gritted his teeth. "We have to find Claire and get out of here." But as they pressed on, the whispers grew louder, and the forest seemed to twist and warp around them. Emily screamed as a figure loomed out of the snow. It was her brother who had died years ago. "Emily, it's me," the figure said, its voice dripping with false warmth. "I need your help." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she staggered toward it. "No, this can't be." "Emily, stop!" Ryan yelled, but she was gone, her silhouette swallowed by the storm. Panic set in as Ryan and Max clung to each other, the storm battering them with unrelenting ferocity. They stumbled through the snow until they found an old, weathered tent barely visible beneath a drift. Inside, they discovered a battered diary wrapped in a layer of frost. Max's shaking hands opened it, revealing pages filled with frantic handwriting. The entries told the story of a lone camper who had been lured by the same whispers years ago. The camper described seeing loved ones, hearing their voices, and feeling an irresistible pull to follow. The last entry was a scrawled warning. "They are the lost, spirits who froze here, unable to move on. They lure others to share their fate, feeding on their warmth, their life. If you hear them, don't listen. Don't follow. They'll take you too." The tent shook violently as the storm's fury intensified. The whispers outside turned into guttural cries, as if the spirits were enraged by the discovery of their secret. "We have to go," Ryan shouted, grabbing Max's arm. But Max's eyes were wide and unfocused. "Ryan, do you see that?" Ryan followed his gaze and felt his stomach drop. Through the swirling snow stood Max's younger sister, who had gone missing years ago. She looked exactly as she had on the day she vanished, her eyes wide and pleading. "Max, don't. I have to." Max stepped forward, his voice breaking. "She's been waiting for me." "Max, it's not her!" Ryan yelled, but it was too late. Max disappeared into the blizzard, leaving Ryan alone. The storm closed in, the whispers now a deafening roar. Ryan stumbled forward, his body numb and his mind teetering on the edge of despair. The trees seemed alive, their branches clawing at him, their roots tripping his every step. Just as he thought he would succumb, he saw a faint glow through the snow, a highway. Summoning the last of his strength, Ryan stumbled toward it. He collapsed at the edge of the road, his body frozen and his breath shallow. The headlights of a passing car illuminated his broken form. The driver, a kind-faced woman, rushed to his side, wrapping him in a blanket and calling for help. As Ryan was lifted into the warmth of the car, he glanced back at the forest. The storm had already begun to dissipate, and the whispers were fading. But in the distance, just barely visible, he thought he saw the twisted figure of the snowman, its mocking grin etched forever into his memory. Snowstorms have always been seen as nature's paradox. Beautiful yet brutal, tranquil yet treacherous. They blanket the world in silence, offering a false sense of peace while hiding dangers beneath their surface. The two stories I shared, the driver's nightmare and the camper's dread, echoed this duality. In both tales, voices emerged from the howling winds, acting as harbingers of doom. But what were these voices, really? Were they malevolent spirits seeking to ensnare the living, or merely the echoes of human fear and imagination amplified by isolation? Both accounts carry an undeniable truth. Snowstorms don't just trap people physically, they entrap their minds as well. The stillness becomes deafening. The cold invades not just the body but the spirit, and the absence of the familiar warps perception. It's in this void that the whispers come alive, and whether they're real or not, they force us to confront something primal, the terror of being utterly alone. These stories resonate because they touch on something universal. Isolation magnifies fear. When cut off from the safety of human connection, even the strongest among us can succumb to our vulnerabilities. The whispers in these tales serve as metaphors for the intrusive thoughts that creep in during solitude. The regrets, the doubts, the unspoken truths we often bury beneath the noise of daily life. But there's also a cautionary lesson here. Curiosity can be dangerous. In the driver's nightmare, following the voice led to near disaster. In the camper's dread, the group's decision to investigate footprints and symbols sealed their fate. Sometimes, mysteries are better left unsolved. There's an innate human desire to seek answers. But what if those answers demand more than we're prepared to give? These stories remind us that not all calls should be answered, not all paths should be followed, and not all whispers are meant to be understood. Even now, I can't shake the unease these stories leave behind. Every snowstorm feels different, charged with an undercurrent of something alive. When the wind howls outside my window, I catch myself straining to hear, to distinguish its natural cadence from something more deliberate. And I wonder, is it whispering to me too? Perhaps these stories are a reflection of our own fears, given life through the vast, lonely expanse of snow. Or perhaps they're warnings, whispered through time by those who wandered too far, listened too closely, or dared to understand what shouldn't be known. If you've ever experienced something similar, a voice in the wind, a mystery that defied explanation, I invite you to share it. There's something both haunting and comforting in knowing that we're not alone in our brushes with the unknown. Maybe together, we can find solace, or at least company, in the whispers of the storm.